The study found that 6.9 million residents benefited from free water in 2006, but this number dropped to just over 3 million in 2019. For now, as we expand on this conversation, I'm joined by Danga Muwowo, the Program Manager for Well-Governed Cities at SA Cities Network. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I mean, these numbers are out and essentially giving us a clearer picture of what exactly is happening within the municipal space. What is your reaction to this latest finding?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Perhaps I should preface my statements by saying that I work at the South African Cities Network on well-governed cities and municipal finance, and we focus on the metros plus Msunduzi. So our detailed research focuses on those cities. However, the general trends that you're speaking to across the municipalities are ones that we've also seen in our cities. And really what they're saying is that the good news is that services of water, electricity, solid waste and sanitation and so on are increasing in terms of the numbers of people receiving those who live in municipalities. But on the other hand, that the lowest income consumers and the indigent have been receiving decreasing amounts of those free basic services over time.
And as we, try and make sense of this information that's come out and the impact that it has now on general communities, and of course the ripple effect being the number of protests that we've seen when communities are dissatisfied with services, as we try and get more depth, we also know that the Auditor General spoke about how government finances are still a mess and there needs to be greater accountability. How does this then now form into this survey that came out from Stats SA on a way forward, especially at a time of COVID-19 for community members?
Well, I think it's fair to say that perhaps those things are linked, but not perhaps in the way that, may be apparent. So on the one hand, I think you're right that across the board, greater accountability and greater probity with the use of public funds in terms of providing the services that municipalities are supposed to would be a good thing. And that's something that we urge in our research applying to the metros. I think the situation in some of the other municipalities perhaps might be even more requiring perhaps more attention, as we've heard from reports over the years. Having said that, though, I think we should also not lose sight of the fact why we have free basic services to begin with. So the local government equitable share is the part of national revenue, the division of revenue that is given to local government as the sphere of government closest to the people, the coalface of delivery, to provide for free basic services for poor households and indigent households within their boundaries. So the concern really is that are we still able to provide for those indigent and poor households? And we find that, at least speaking for the metros, we are indeed able to do that. However, as a result of some of the fiscal pressures that metros are facing, and I imagine if metros are facing, that's probably the case across the board in the municipal space, which is that they have to provide services and receive revenue from paying customers. So it's a good thing that paying customers are increasing, which allows them to cross-subsidize. But the local government equitable shares originally intended is they're being forced to zero in on the targeting. And I think that's why we're seeing the decreases in indigent households and poor households receiving those free basic services, as this survey, non-financial survey, has revealed. And the reason for that, put simply, is that municipalities are having to find other things to take this money and apply it to. So wherever possible, they're focusing the subsidies. It's no longer broad-based targeting. They're really focusing the subsidies, registering indigents and so on, to try and decrease the number of people receiving the amount of free basic services that perhaps they would have received in the past, and then diverting the savings from that to other causes, which also are not necessarily their fault because they are unfunded mandates that they face.
Is this a situation that we're now seeing worsening because of COVID-19, or was it a long time coming in terms of the way that municipalities are managed?
That's a good question, and in fact, COVID-19 has shone a spotlight on life in general, so particularly around the economy and how public finances are being spent and used. So that's definitely shone that spotlight on the crisis. But I think this has been a systemic issue from the city network perspective, which is that the cities in general and municipalities, indeed all urban areas, are facing challenges. that were perhaps not, the scale of which was perhaps not anticipated when the local government fiscal framework was set up and when municipalities were demarcated in the early 2000s, which is to say that urbanization, people moving into cities in search of a better way of life, in search of jobs and economic opportunities, would put pressure on cities to provide free basic services, number one. And number two, that the majority of those people coming in search of work, of course, would be poor and indigent, who are precisely those numbers who would be needing those services. So while on the one hand, cities have done and municipalities have done a really commendable job in expanding the electricity, the water, and so on, as their numbers suggest, on the other hand, it's the provision for the less fortunate among us in society, which has been a challenge, and indeed one that we argue that there needs to be a closer focus on, how we actually address this challenge that municipalities face.
And what are some of your suggestions? I mean, you speak about these services being really needed, and of course, looking at the demographics and the ailing economy, now more than ever, these free services are a desperate call.
Well, if I had the answer to that, I suppose I would be working for the National Treasury. But I mean, at a minimum, I think would be a sort of an understanding, I think, of a deeper understanding for each municipality. And this has to be done, as I say, it's a system-wide problem. But of course, each municipality faces its unique situation. And in terms of their ability to raise revenue, number one, and particularly in this case, what the picture suggests to us is that the revenue that municipalities are able to raise and this grant that they receive from National Treasury, the local government equitable share intended for basic services, there's a gap in between those two things. And so municipalities are not necessarily able to provide all the free services that they should by right and by the Constitution be providing to everybody. So we need really a sort of a group of people from across national and local spheres of government and also the provinces to discuss this issue of unfunded mandates. So, for example, healthcare provision is a provincial mandate, but some local clinics municipalities are actually running. The district development model is talking about the localization of services and thinking about planning and so on. But as part of that exercise, I would suspect that some of the capacities and some of the ability of the local municipalities and district municipalities would also be examined in the same light to say, are these boundaries in terms of fiscal boundaries, revenue raising capability, compensated by money that we're receiving from the National Treasury? Is this actually fit for purpose any longer now we're 20 years into this local government dispensation?
And what do you believe, are some of the driving trends that have led to a situation like this, especially looking at the manner in which cities were run 20 years ago, as you mentioned, that part of things?
Well, as I said, I can only really speak in detail to the experience in the metros, which is what we focus on at the city's network. And very much in the case of the metros, which face the largest challenge, they contain 40% of our population and are the biggest magnet in terms of this challenge of urbanization we were describing earlier. It is that quite simply there is not enough money perhaps to go around to cover some of those obligations that cities do in fact require. And this is not just a simple sort of every year accounting exercise, but don't forget that the cities also not only have to provide for free basic services and so on, but they also have to put in place the infrastructure that the new city residents will need. They need the infrastructure that actually provides the electricity, provides the water, provides the roads and so on, as well as also to maintain the infrastructure that was built many years ago and has a 30-year lifespan and needs maintenance. So those are some of the two big challenges they face, in addition to achieving some of the broader things we ask them to do, which is to provide a kind of spatially transformed cities where we no longer have the poorest people traveling the longest distance to work, which is completely at odds and reflects the non-natural way, the distorted way in which development happened because of apartheid. So there's a lot of challenges that cities admirably are dealing with as best they can. But I do think, as I said, there really is a need to look at some of the finer elements of how the model is working. The model in general was of course conceived and a great thought was put into it. But at this point now we're seeing elements of it which suggest tweaking is required.
Thank you so much for your time.